Deep in the steamy highlands of New Guinea, some 8,000 years ago, a hunter first chewed on the thick stalk of a wild grass and tasted something extraordinary. That sweet juice, dripping from crushed sugar cane, would one day reshape economies and empires, but for that moment, it was simply magic found among the clouds. From those island mountains, sugar cane traveled west across the seas, carried by traders until it found fertile soil in the river valleys of India. Around 500 BCE, farmers here learned to cultivate the grass deliberately, transforming wild patches into orderly rows of green gold that swayed in the monsoon winds. The Indians discovered that crushing the cane released more than just sweet water. When they boiled the juice in heavy clay pots, it thickened into dark, precious crystals. This wasn't the white powder we know today, but a dense, brown treasure called sharkara in Sanskrit, valued more highly than honey or dates. Because making sugar required crushing countless stalks and hours of careful boiling, only the wealthy could afford such sweetness, and doctors prescribed it as medicine rather than food. For centuries, sugar remained a luxury spice, carried along ancient trade routes in tiny blocks wrapped in palm leaves, mysterious and rare as any exotic perfume. Long before European nobility ever tasted its sweetness, Arab scholars and merchants had transformed sugar from a wild grass into a cultivated treasure. In the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, irrigation channels carried water to dense fields of tall green cane, while nearby refineries turned the extracted juice into pale golden cones. These crystalline treasures would soon travel farther than any trader had dared imagine. The journey began not on ships, but on the backs of camels swaying through desert dunes that stretched like golden seas toward the horizon. Caravan masters navigated by stars and stone landmarks, their pack animals laden with precious cargo wrapped in protective layers of crimson and saffron silk. Each step westward carried the pale golden sugar, cones closer to markets where they would command prices greater than silver. When the first lumps reached the apothecaries of Venice and Constantinople, they were not greeted as food, but as medicine for the wealthy and divine. Medieval physicians ground the precious pale golden crystals into powders mixed with ginger and pepper, prescribing them for ailments ranging from fever to melancholy. Only the richest patients could afford such treatment, making sugar a symbol of survival itself. Venetian merchants quickly realized that controlling the sugar trade meant controlling a river of wealth that flowed from the east. They established warehouses along the Grand Canal where factors inspected each shipment, rejecting any pale golden cone that bore cracks or darker amber hues. Through their careful stewardship, sugar became the secret currency of diplomatic gifts between popes and princes. By the 12th century, the craving had spread beyond medicine into the kitchens of Norman Sicily and Crusader castles, where cooks discovered sugar's power to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Royal confectioners spun threads of molten sweetness into abstract sculptures that dazzled guests at coronation feasts. Yet for every pound that reached European tables, 10 more vanished into the holds of ships bound for new adventures. As the centuries turned, what began as a pharmacist's secret became a craving that would reshape continents and rewrite the fates of millions. The Arab traders had built the bridge, but Europeans were already dreaming of owning the land where sugar cane grew wild under tropical suns. The stage was set for a transformation more bitter than sweet. As European aristocrats stirred sugar into their tea, few imagined the brutal reality hidden inside each crystalline spoonful. The explosive demand for this white gold created an insatiable hunger for labor that plantation owners resolved through one of history's darkest enterprises, the transatlantic slave trade. A devastating triangular trade emerged, binding 3 continents in chains. Merchant ships departed Europe loaded with manufactured goods, sailed to Africa to exchange them for kidnapped men and women, then crossed the Atlantic to sell human lives to plantation owners hungry for workers to tend the endless fields of cane. Those who survived the horrific Middle Passage arrived to find themselves standing on auction blocks within sight of the towering cane fields. Families were torn apart as buyers inspected muscles and stature, purchasing human beings as tools to harvest the crop that would sweeten cakes in London and Paris. From dawn until dusk, enslaved workers wielded machetes among the razor-sharp leaves, cutting cane under the brutal tropical sun. The most dangerous work awaited in the boiling houses, where laborers fed cut cane into crushing mills and tended copper cauldrons of bubbling syrup, suffering burns and exhaustion to produce the precious crystals. This system generated enormous wealth that transformed European cities, funding grand palaces and museums while destroying African communities. Yet amidst the oppression, resilient cultures flourished in secret, blending African traditions with new surroundings, creating languages, music, and spiritual practices that would survive long after the plantations ceased production. Resistance took many forms, from breaking tools to fleeing into the mountains to form free communities called Maroons. These acts of courage, combined with the growing abolition movement, slowly chipped away at the institution that had built the sugar economy. Today, when we reach for sugar, we touch a legacy that shaped modern economies, societies, and inequalities. Understanding this bitter harvest reminds us that the sweetest pleasures have historically carried the heaviest human costs, and that remembering these stories honors those who endured the cane. When British blockades severed France from Caribbean cane sugar during the Napoleonic Wars, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte saw opportunity where others saw scarcity. He offered a fortune to anyone who could extract sweet crystals from the humble sugar beet growing in European soil, sparking a scientific race that would forever change how the world eats. In a Berlin laboratory, chemist Franz Karl Achard refined earlier discoveries to create the first viable beet sugar factory in 1801, proving that white roots could yield snowy crystals as pure as any tropical cane. Within decades, steam-powered presses roared to life across France and Germany, crushing pale ivory beets into sweet pulp while furnaces boiled away the watery juice. The Industrial Revolution transformed sugar production from an artisanal craft into a mechanical marvel, as iron gears turned and copper vats steamed with relentless efficiency. Where skilled hands once painstakingly tended small batches, towering factories now poured forth mountains of affordable sugar, filling the air with the scent of caramelized sweetness and coal smoke. By the 1850s, sugar had shed its status as a luxury for the wealthy, becoming a cheap staple in every working-class cupboard across Europe and America. This white avalanche revolutionized diets, sneaking into jams, breads, and teacups, creating new cravings that industry was all too happy to satisfy with ever-cheaper sweets. Yet abundance carried hidden costs, as dentists' chairs filled with patients suffering from mysterious tooth decay and doctors noted strange new ailments linked to overconsumption. The miracle of mechanization had democratized sweetness, but it also shackled society to a craving that would grow sweeter and more complex with each passing decade. Today, the average person consumes nearly 20 teaspoons of sugar daily, a staggering increase from the mere teaspoon our ancestors savored over months. This white crystal, once a luxury reserved for emperors, now hides in nearly every packaged food on supermarket shelves, creating a hidden dependency that most consumers barely recognize. Medical researchers have traced clear pathways between excessive sugar consumption and rising rates of diabetes, heart disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The body metabolizes these sweet crystals differently than natural sugars found in fruit, triggering inflammatory responses that accumulate silently over decades. Producing just 1 pound of refined sugar requires over 200 gallons of water, while vast monocultures of sugar cane displace diverse ecosystems and deplete soil nutrients across tropical regions. The environmental footprint of sweetness extends beyond the farm, as processing plants release acidic wastewater and greenhouse gases into surrounding communities. Scientists and chefs now experiment with stevia leaves, monk fruit extracts, and sugar alcohols that promise sweetness without the metabolic consequences, though each alternative carries its own complex profile of aftertastes and digestive effects. Meanwhile, food engineers develop miraculin proteins and cooling compounds that retrain the tongue to perceive less sugar as adequately sweet. As we stand in this modern dilemma, the challenge is not simply finding replacements for sugar, but rebuilding our relationship with sweetness itself. Perhaps the solution lies not in the laboratory, but in returning to the patience of our ancestors who understood that the sweetest moments require no added sugar at all.